short talk what I gained, because in many cases I find myself becoming, just as the lecturer mentioned, mechanical or ritualistic in one or more of the 5 pillars of Islam, or any other of the injunctions of Islam, without internalizing the meaning behind them, which is a direct result of and the purpose of changing the character and developing the character. May Allah give us that insight and help us develop our character, inshallah. Brothers and sisters, I would hope that these questions, as always, you know, the Islamic in Perspective series, we try to keep the questions revolving around the topic, and as we mentioned earlier, that the questions will be in 2 parts. Number 1, the first part, which will be revolving around the topic, which is developing the Muslim character through the through the 5 pillars of Islam. And then the second part, which will be revolving the questions, that is, revolving around the books that Sheikh Bilal has authored. So I'm going to weed them out, those questions that are not pertaining directly to the topic. And inshallah, if he desires, and if Allah wills, then we'll come back to those questions which weren't directly related to the topic. The first is, in an effort to develop an Islamic community, do you suggest that we as Muslims buy homes and property in proximity to each other, for example? Also, should we ignore the issue of riba as it relates to mortgages?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I do suggest that Muslims have to live in close proximity to each other. This is not something which is something philosophical, which has no basis in reality. If we look at the history of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, what we see is a period in Mecca when Muslims were scattered. The influence that Islam had on the Meccan society, wherein only 300 plus people accepted Islam during 13 years. And then we see the period of Medina, where Muslims lived in close proximity and started to make decisions and started to determine the flow of their lives and with relationship to the other communities around them. And we see in that period of 10 years, in some cases, 300 people accepted Islam in one instant, where individuals would come as representatives of a tribe and give his oath of allegiance to Prophet Muhammad ﷺ on behalf of the tribe as a whole. And when we look historically through the various Islamic movements, whether in Africa, in Asia, etc., we see that the success lay in the implementation of that model. We see what has happened to Muslims in India and Muslims in Pakistan. The Muslims who migrated, made the hijrah to Pakistan, I mean, they still have problems. It doesn't say that they're free of problems, you know, because they really didn't implement Islam in the course of the actual governmental structure of the country. I mean, that stage was not completed. But the physical migration has protected them from the acts of violence which the Hindus perpetrate on the Muslims daily in India. We see in India itself, where the Muslims are concentrated in certain cities like Hyderabad and others, the acts of violence are much less than where they are in smaller numbers. This is reality. It is a necessity for the Muslims to come and live together in close proximity, for their own survival, for the survival of their families, for the survival of the religion amongst them. It is a necessity. And until and unless we realize that, we will continue to have huge segments of our society, Islamic society, decimated. Islam will come in, a group accepts Islam, and they are unable to pass it down to the next generation. The new generation, they go into kufr. Another set come into Islam. And that process is continually repeated. That's the situation that we'll find ourselves in, with few exceptions. And not only that, there will be many aspects of Islam that we will not be able to fulfill, will not be able to practice, because the pressure of the society around us will force us to conform to the norms of that society. And until Muslims form themselves in such types of community where they can now determine the norms of their area, then they will continue to be subject to the violence and the corruption which has, produced amongst the Muslims, crackheads. I hear about, this brother, he was really down in Islam, but fortunately now he's a crackhead. He's going through rehabilitation, That brother, he was this, that, and he got caught selling dope. He was, you have a little boy, Yusuf, what was his name? Yusuf Hawkins, was involved in gang rape. These kind of things. Yusuf Salam, Allah knows, maybe he wasn't a Muslim, but maybe his mother was, or his father was, and they got divorced, or whatever, but somewhere along the line, there was a Muslim input there, but it didn't go anywhere, and we'll hear more and more of these, people committing violent crimes in the society and having what we classify as Muslim names. And with the spread of drugs, because with each year, we may look at crack as being it, but it isn't. Next year, year after next, something else is coming that's going to be even more devastating than crack. And it's going to rip off another segment of the society, males and females, young and old. And the only way we can stop that kind of thing is by establishing communities where we are in close proximity of each other, where we can protect the children and the women and our brothers. This doesn't mean that we now go wholeheartedly into riba, into interest, mortgages, etc. It doesn't mean that, because this is something prohibited, and we know that we cannot produce halal from haram. If we take haram means, we're not going to end up with halal ends. It may look good, but it won't be halal. It will have the curse of Allah on it instead of the blessing of Allah. So we know that the steps have to be halal. We have to follow what has been prescribed by Allah. And what that is going to require is a certain amount of sacrifice on the part of those who make this kind of a step. It's going to mean that it will have to be an integrated move. If we look at, for example, the community here, the vast majority, say, coming from Afro-American backgrounds, coming out of a society of high unemployment, low education, and all these other factors, we look at that reality. And so the majority, or many who come in, are coming out of that kind of a background. They do not have the economic means to make such a move. But we at the same time have a large body of people who are immigrating here to America, who are coming from other countries with high skills, etc., who are able to set themselves up with very nice homes and, making a lot of money. So it means that for such a community to work, that aspect of the Muslim community, which is part of the Muslim community, has to be infused with the other aspects. It means that the barriers which separate have to be broken down. That community has to be, as I said, a universal community. It will reflect the Muslim world. It will not be an Afro-American community. It can't be, because that would not be universal. It will reflect the diversity of backgrounds of the people who have accepted Islam or who have come over here from Muslim countries. That is the reality. As much as we might feel, based on past experiences with peoples of other cultures, we have to go beyond these experiences. We have to realize that universality, which can only become manifest in a true Muslim community, wherein all of the aspects are integrated. So by utilizing all of the facets of the Muslim community, the physical, the intellectual, the economic, the spiritual. When we bring these all together, then it is possible for us to create that community without being involved in mortgages, riba, etc.
There are a few of these questions that revolve around basically the same topic, and I'm going to read them anyway, just in case you don't feel like I'm trying to slight you or trying to throw your question in the garbage or something like that. But a few of them revolve around what I think he answered in this first question, maybe two or three of them. I'm going to read them anyway, inshallah. One is, what are some of the ways that we can go about forming a Muslim community? And I'll read another one so that we can probably kill a couple of birds with one stone, inshallah. And do we have Islamic communities in the United States or Canada that you know of? And we'll deal with those two first. And also, I have asked this question before from other imams and sheikhs. The good character in a Muslim, I believe it's a Muslim indeed, how do we develop this good Muslim, quote unquote, this good, quote unquote, Muslim that we would like to be, to see it work with our families and unity with brotherhood in developing an Islamic state? I can't really read it well, but
okay, as I said, the development of the Muslim character, it comes through a process, one, of education, in the sense that those people who are newly coming into the community, when they are being taught Islam, that emphasis is placed on the character. Two, that Muslims, in the course of their dealing with each other, keep in mind these factors, these things, the negative character traits have to be addressed, tackled, rooted out when people deal with each other. But ultimately, as I said, that the major way in which it could be dealt with is through that physical community. That's where it can be dealt with on a large scale. As we exist now as individuals, it involves individual introspection. Each individual has to look into himself or herself, look at the pillars of Islam, look at the principles that I outlined, and many other principles that I'm sure they will find once they start looking at them in terms of Muslim character, and they have to try to deal with themselves. So it's because of the situation that we exist in, a lot of the weight falls on the individual here. The community can help, or can provide some support in its programs, in its educational programs. The individuals who represent the leadership, they would need to spend extra time together to help to root out these characteristics so they become examples to the rest of the community, and they can systematically try to deal with it amongst the other members of the community. But the problem is that when you have people who are scattered, fragmented, who have no allegiance, how can you insist that an individual start to develop these traits? He wants to curse, you tell him, brother, you shouldn't curse. But who are you? Who are you to tell him not to curse? Until he feels himself committed to something, where the ideals of that thing become his ideals, then it's very difficult for that individual to change. This is why I emphasize the necessity of that community. The question, what are the ways that we can go about forming the Muslim community? One of the ways involves looking in the area which exists here for an area which has the potential for emigration, where people could make hijrah to. The land prices are reasonable, or the possibility for development there is reasonable. And once that area is decided upon, then those individuals who have the dream, because right now it's a dream. And this answers the question about Islamic communities in the USA and Canada. Now, right now it is a dream. These physical communities, to a large degree, don't exist. To most degree. There are efforts being made in different places. I've observed some efforts, but on a realistic and complete kind of basis, I don't believe it exists. I have not heard of it. I have not seen it. But those people who have the dream would have to then begin by making the sacrifice, because people, the masses of people, unfortunately, are like sheep. And when the lead sheep go in one direction, they go in that direction. I mean, that's just the way they are, the masses of people. I know we all like to think of ourselves as individuals, but generally speaking, true individuals are those who are prepared to make that sacrifice. When the call for sacrifice comes, everybody will get up. And what we find is no. There's only a few get up. These are the true individuals. The rest, who are not prepared to make the sacrifice, they're part of the flock. So it means that those individuals who have that vision would then have to lay the groundwork by making those initial sacrifices. The vision has to be taught, it has to be spoken of, it has to be encouraged, it has to be nourished in our children, in our wives, with our wives, in our groupings, in our gatherings. This vision has to be nourished. We have to reach out to other communities that have similar problems, where there are some people who share or might share this vision, to try to incorporate them. And at the time when we find we have enough people to make the step, then we make that step. So there are two sides to it. One, a concerted effort. If there is a core group that sees the importance, then they have to make an effort to start to seek information concerning real estate, etc., to try to find a viable point. Those, at the same time, there has to be an educational process for the community to try to enlighten the community, to try to give them a part of that dream, and to try to reach out to bring in the other elements which are necessary for the establishment, of the community.
These two questions are almost the same. Would it be more appropriate to use the terms, and this is in reference to a statement you made, those more fortunate, those less fortunate, as opposed to the terms those above you and those below you? If not, please elaborate. And also, the second question is basically the same. I do not understand what is meant by do not look to those above us, but look to those below us.
Okay, the first question, I think, sort of clarifies the concept of looking to those above us. Above meaning those people who are on a higher level of economics. If we put things on a scale, we have an up and a down. That which is above and below. Above the poverty line, below the poverty line. I mean, these are, we don't need to get too philosophical about them, really. I mean, the reality is what we live, The reality is that this above or below, it has nothing to do with the worth of an individual. Because we're not talking about a person who is above us in worth. He or she may be above us in the sense that they are on a higher level of economics. Or if we were to put beauty on a scale, and each and every one of us has a scale of beauty. We have a line which we say below that we call ugly, and above that we call pretty, or handsome. We have, different levels on that too. There are people who we feel, man, I wish I looked like him, or I wish I looked like her. The sisters may say, this is above. I mean, it's not to say that makes them worth more than the people who are below, because Allah doesn't look, as the Prophet ﷺ says, Allah doesn't look at your form, your outer form. He looks at your deeds, your heart and your deeds. But this is just the reality of life. As I said, you don't need to get too philosophical about it. I'm not trying to put anybody down or anything. It's just the realities that we live. We have scales. So, what the hadith was saying is that when we open a magazine and we see somebody who looks, we feel, oh man, what a lucky dude, Whether he's got a Mercedes and he's this, or he's just looking like, the one that all the girls are supposed to be running after. When we look at such an individual, Prophet ﷺ is saying that we should look to one below us, in the sense of one we say, boy, I'm glad I don't look like him, at least I got a car. He don't even have a car. He got to take a bus. This is why, so we can be appreciative of what Allah has given us. Not that we may feel proud, because of course this is wrong. Pride is something despicable in Islam. Pride, Prophet ﷺ said, one who has a mustard seed's worth of pride in his heart will not enter paradise. This is why Prophet ﷺ had also given us the dua when you look at yourself, in the mirror, to say, oh Allah, make my character good as you have made my appearance good. You don't get off on yourself when you look in the mirror, but you remember that there's something more important, which is your character.
What if you are new to Islam and you don't come to the masjid because the people there are in one group and you don't feel part of that group, and you don't know what they're talking about, and you don't know a lot about Islam because you're new to the deen? What should I do? I pray at home and go to Friday prayer, but mostly I stay to myself.
Well, this is what I mentioned earlier, that this is dangerous. It's dangerous for a person, especially a new Muslim, to stay by themselves. Because by staying by oneself, one now becomes prey to Satan. Prophet ﷺ said that the wolf snatches the stray sheep. That's the one that the wolf snatches. When the sheep are in a group, they can defend themselves. When the sheep goes off astray, and the Prophet ﷺ also said, whoever goes astray, like goes off away from the main group, he goes off and ends up in hell. Man shadda fi an-nar. You go off by yourself, eventually it's going to take you to hell, because you're open prey to Satan. Satan can make certain things appear appealing to you. You don't have any input from the people around you now. You're not discussing, you're not interacting with them, so that if you got a bad idea, they can say, well, listen, that isn't quite right, brother, or sister, you need to think about this. This Islam really teaches this. Read it in the Quran, read it in the Hadith, so you can get some input. When you're by yourself without that input, it's very easy. The idea comes to your mind, it sounds right to me, and then you go ahead and do it, and you end up, in hell. So, such an individual, male or female, in spite of the fact that, they may feel outside of the group, they have to go and try to be amongst the group. Even though they may be looked at with suspicion in the beginning, etc., they have to keep coming. By interacting with the group, eventually the barriers will, inshallah, break down. If they're sincere, and the people who form the group in the masjid, inshallah, they're sincere people. They may have developed some traits which are not good traits, in the sense of cliquism, and this happens to many masjids, many groups, where they get a sort of elitist kind of feeling which develops amongst them, where they look at anybody who's not a part as being, an enemy of, this kind of attitude, which is dangerous also in itself. So that individual should strive to be amongst that group, to try to bear the harm, the difficulties that they may face, but Allah's hand is on the group, on the community, and they need to be a part of that community. If they find after coming into the community that in fact these people are evil, in fact their intent, their plans, etc. are evil, then they need to be away from that community and find another community. But they need to be with the community. At least in our situation where we're not living together physically, people are scattered, it becomes essential that as much as our time as possible should be spent around God-fearing Muslims. This is essential for not only the newcomer to Islam, but as well those people who have been in Islam for some period of time. This is just basic if they want to survive they must be around, God-fearing Muslims.
I'm going to try to get these questions answered by Sheikh Bilal as quickly as possible, because the time is going quickly. And also, I'd like to know if have the sisters sent up any questions? They're part of these questions? Okay. All right. The next question is, in order to have a Muslim community, there must be an Amir of that community. In light of this, here in North America, is it advisable that Muslims give bay'ah, or pledge of loyalty, to a local Amir, even though we don't have a Khalifa?
An Amir in this community, in this situation, is like a coordinator. He is not Amir al-Mu'mineen, to whom you're going to give bay'ah to. To give bay'ah to this coordinator is in fact a form of bid'ah. It is something which became popular amongst various Sufi tariqas, the Sufi groups, which evolved, where bay'ah would be given to the sheikh of the order, this tradition. And as some Muslim movements developed in the recent times, in the 20th century, where these practices, these cultural practices now were also infused along with their efforts to develop a viable movement to make Islamic change, they incorporated some of these ideas. And among them is this idea of bay'ah. So you may find it amongst some of the well-known movements. However, if we go back in the past and look amongst the early Muslims, you will find that this bay'ah that we know around today was not in their practice. And furthermore, it becomes very dangerous when people associate this Amir coordinator with the Amir al-Mu'mineen, because it breeds rivalries and division which Muslims in this country cannot afford to live with. It's destructive. The Amir for us is only a coordinator. He should have with him a shura, of people who have good knowledge of Islam and the other information which is necessary for running the community. And the decisions should be made in the light of discussion. It should not be arbitrary decisions. The Amir should not overrule the shura in this type of circumstance, because he's a coordinator. He's a coordinator. And once we give the coordinator the qualities of the Amir al-Mu'mineen, the head, the Khalifa of the Muslims, then we open up ourselves to deviation, where that individual without knowledge may make decisions which are harmful to the community as a whole, and there is no way of checking such decisions.
The characteristic of generosity, should this attribute be offered to a non-Muslim as well as a Muslim?
Definitely. Generosity is not something which you turn on and off. Generosity is, as a characteristic, as a Muslim, part of the Muslim character, it is something which should be displayed in all circumstances. Of course, one has to have priorities, prioritize things. If he has food to give out or money to give out, he has to go according to those who are most in need, those who are closest to him. He doesn't leave his family and express his generosity to his neighbors and his family are in need. No. He has to take care of his family first. Generosity begins at home. Then he deals with those people, outside of his family circumstance. Similarly, within the Muslim community, Muslims have a direct right over the wealth of each individual. So he has to give them priority over non-Muslims. But it doesn't mean that he's not generous to non-Muslims. If the circumstance exists for him to be generous, where he is not neglecting a Muslim in order to be generous to a non-Muslim, then he must be generous to a non-Muslim also. And in the course of da'wah, this is essential. If a person doesn't feel, because generosity is something which affects the character in such a way that the person, is pleasant, is a pleasant type of person. Because, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, greeting your brother with a smiling face is charity, is an act of generosity. So, when that Muslim has this kind of characteristic, when he greets people with a smiling face, this is not something he smiles at the Muslims, when he meets the non-Muslims he's frowning, no. This is going to be his way. And when he greets non-Muslims smiling in a pleasant manner, then they are likely to be attracted to what he has to say. They are likely to want to listen to what he has to say. So it becomes something which is essential for us to carry on da'wah, realistically.
We're going to try our best now, brothers and sisters, inshallah, to round up the questions for the first part of these questions and answers, and get to questions that revolve around the books that Sheikh Bilal has authored. The last two questions regarding the topic, can you give us in the degree of blessings one receives by visiting the Muslim who is ill, the degree of blessings in visiting the Muslim who is ill? And the second question is, and lastly, inshallah, the hadith in Imam al-Nawawi's 40 hadith, you're not a believer until you love for your brother that which you love for yourself. Can you tell us more on this, even from the Quran, and why is there so much backbiting and slandering?
Well, the degree of blessing for visiting a Muslim who is ill, I can't really say in terms of figures, what does one classify it in terms of degrees. I don't really understand quite what the person is referring to. But we know that this is one of the rights that a Muslim has on another Muslim, that when he is sick or when she is sick, that they are visited. It is something compulsory, a right on each and every Muslim. And we know there's also a hadith where Allah had referred to a person visiting a Muslim who was sick as if that person was visiting Allah. So Allah has put it on a very high level. It is a duty. This is part of the concern. This is part of the Islamic character, that he or she feels concern for the brother and sister, who is ill, to try to come to recite some Quran, to pray for them, to wish them well. If we don't have that, then we don't have a bond. We don't have really the bond of community. If a Muslim gets sick and nobody goes to visit that person or knows about the person, whatever, it means it's showing us that the community really isn't there. It's just something theoretical, something in words, because this is part of the deeds which reflect the Muslim character and the Muslim community. As far as going into one not truly believing until one loves for one's brother what one loves for oneself, to try to elaborate on that would involve another lecture. In all honesty, I think that the principles of the Muslim character provide us with the attitude which would give us the kind of concern for our brothers and sisters that we should hold. This love for our brother or our sister Muslim, what we love for ourselves, can only come from the Muslim character, one who has the various facets that make up the Muslim character. Generosity, it can only come with that characteristic. All of the various characteristics which I spoke about, they're all reflected in that love for the brother and sister, what we love for ourselves. So I feel that with the development of the Muslim character, then this statement of the Prophet ﷺ, can become manifest in people's lives, can be real. Because it's very easy to say and to teach that, but it only becomes real when we live it, when we have the kind of characteristics which produce in the Muslim that love for our brother. The Prophet Muhammad had said that among the 7 people who are shaded by the throne of Allah on the day when there is no shade is one who loves his brother for the sake of Allah. That's the bottom line. That's success. But that can only come when we have internalized the characteristics of the Muslim.
Okay. This next question is it feasible and important to send ourselves and children to school for particular things, and in parentheses, business, politics, sociology, etc., end of parentheses, which would allow us to better gain some control of society in order to establish the law of Allah? And I'll add this other question with this one. I would like to go to the Middle East, to go to Islamic school, to build my faith and self, as well as to build up, I imagine it's saying, to build up the community here. How can I get into school, meaning Islamic school? The first question, I think you have it.
It is a requirement for us to send either ourselves or our children to some institutions which have skills which are necessary for functioning in this society. Business, you must have Muslim businesses. But the point is that if a person is to study it, they have to study it from an Islamic point of view. They learn the Western capitalistic approach and they reanalyze it or analyze it according to the Islamic outlook. They should be familiar with the Islamic principles concerning business. So what is useful from that degree in business will be used to benefit the community, and what is not is set aside. And a person who goes through such training could then devise courses for the next generation of Muslims where they could learn the valuable business practices and concepts without having to waste time in learning that which is un-Islamic and harmful. And that applies to the other fields. I mean, fields which have no real value, beyond personal preferences, like, for example, dance. To go to school to learn dance. I mean, this would be nonsensical for a Muslim to do so, or to put their children to go and learn that. It doesn't say Islam prohibits dance, but dance in Islam is something which falls along particular lines. It's not the type of thing which is displayed on stages where people become, artists and where corruption is bred. Because what we find when we look in the society is that corruption tends to be concentrated amongst the artists, the various fields, of entertainment, where people, their lives are devoted to entertaining other people. This breeds a kind of corruption. There's a psychology there which promotes corruption. So Muslims as such would not spend time and effort into these kind of fields, but it doesn't say that some of the things would not be a part of the community, but it would be a natural part, as opposed to an organized, segment of the community that would be specializing in this particular thing for the entertainment of the rest of the community. So, barring those type of segments of education, I would say the vast majority of the other aspects of education available, have definite benefit to the society, the Muslim society, and we should emphasize the furthering of education. I mean, there's an attitude which developed in the past amongst Muslim communities where, people were feeling, well, we shouldn't go to the kafir schools and learn under the kafirs and all this kind of thing, right? But that is destructive. It will destroy the community, because one cannot build a community without architects, without doctors, without lawyers, without the various components which make up the community. So it is essential that we encourage our children, those people who accept Islam, who may be in various fields, they should be encouraged to go ahead and to go right to the end of the field. Not just get a BA, not just an MA, go and get a PhD. Go for it. They should be encouraged to get as much of that information that is available so that they can become, a guiding light now for others. Of course, we're not saying to go and do this and neglect your Islamic education. Islamic education needs to go side by side. They have to be constantly studying, be in contact with other Muslims and in study groups, etc., to balance, to keep a correct view on what they're studying, so they don't end up going off the deep end. But they will be necessary. I mean, when you want to set up institutions which would be alternative institutions to the existing ones in society, you have to do it with people who have gone right to the end. Who have gone right to the end and have mastered those various fields. This is an absolute necessity. So we have to encourage those brothers and sisters who are out of school, they should go back into school. If they have the means, if the system provides some kind of educational courses, whatever, that are available, they should get on in there and get get this information, so that they can improve the quality of their lives, and so that they can also be a part of building a real Islamic community. And also, this would change, to a large degree, the relationship that we hold with the immigrant communities. Because these immigrants, many of them are coming with skills and they're living particular kind of lives, and what they see of the indigenous community, as portrayed on the television, etc., the violence and the crime and all these different kinds of things, and maybe even some of their contacts with some of these, individuals from the community, which tends to be, with hands out, give me some, you got money, I want some of your money, God bless you, you got to share with me, this kind of
we also find that the Prophet Muhammad's wife Aisha reported that every night before going to bed, the Prophet Muhammad, when he sat in his bed before going to sleep, he would put his hands together, he would blow in his hands, and then he would recite this chapter of the Quran, along with the following two chapters after it, Surah Al-Falaq and Surah Al-Nas. And then he would wipe his hands over his body, from his head, his face, the front of his body, and whatever else he could reach. He would do this 3 times. Now, these different narrations from the companions of the Prophet Muhammad show us that this chapter had a special place in the hearts of the Muslims. So much so that some would recite it in every prayer that they made, either beginning their recitation of Quran or closing their recitation. And this was something which was approved by the Prophet Muhammad. Furthermore, he informed us that it was equal in value to 1/3 of the Quran. What this means to us, 1/3 of the Quran, it doesn't mean that if we recite it 3 times, this is actually equal to reciting the Quran. Because that would then discourage people from bothering to recite the whole Quran. If you're going to get the same reward from reciting this chapter 3 times as you would get from reciting or reading the whole Quran, then why bother to read the whole Quran? It will be much more difficult. This will take you weeks, maybe a month, maybe more. The idea here, what was understood, not that it was equal in the sense that you may replace the recitation of the Quran by reciting it 3 times. But that if we were to take all of the topics of the Quran and we were to put them in 3 main categories, this chapter covers one of the categories. 1/3 of what the Quran is talking about is found in this chapter of the Quran. It summarizes 1/3 of the concepts of the Quran. Before reciting the Quran, we are told by Allah in the chapter known as An-Nahl, the bee, verses 98, فَإِذَا قَرَأْتَ الْقُرْآنَ فَاسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ. Whenever you are reciting the Quran, you should seek refuge in Allah from the cursed Satan. This is a commandment of God for us to do so. Why? Because in the 2nd chapter of the Quran, in the 2nd verse, Allah says, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. This is the book in which there is no doubt, guidance for those who fear God. This book is the only book existing on the earth that contains 100% the Word of God. As we say, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Allah says it is the book of guidance for those who fear Allah. It doesn't mean that anybody who picks up the book and they read it, they're going to be guided. Only those who fear Allah, when they pick up that book and they start to read it, they will be guided. And I will tell you from my own experiences, in the Eastern Province, amongst the American troops, over the past 3 months, we had a number of cases of people who would pass through the tent. We had a tent set up, an information tent, with information about Saudi Arabia as well as information about Islam. And in one corner, Islamic books were being sold, and among them, copies of the Quran were being sold. We had people who would come through, buy a copy of the Quran, leave, come back a week later and say, how do I become Muslim? We gave them no explanation about Islam or any detail. No, they just took the book, bought it, they read it, and that was enough. Because they feared God. Myself, I tell you very honestly, when I became Muslim, the first book I read was not the Quran. And probably if I had read the Quran, and I had looked at it to some degree, it would not have guided me. Because at the time I was a communist. I didn't even believe in God. So when I picked up the Quran, I looked at it, there was nothing in it for me. Instead, what I found by reading a book called Islam, the Misunderstood Religion by Muhammad Qutb, in which he made a comparison between Islam, Christianity, communism, capitalism, socialism, from a social, religious, moral point of view. He showed me clearly that the system of Islam, from an economic, social, moral point of view, was far superior to communism. So I became convinced from a political point of view that the system of Islam was suitable for running a state and benefiting people. But as far as believing in God, this came stages later. Because you don't go from a total, denial of the existence of God to the acceptance of God, in a second. This is something which may take time. Unless, sometimes some people have certain, crises in their lives which can cause them to turn to God. But for myself, I'm just saying that to say that it is as Allah said. This book is guidance for those who fear God. So if a person truly fears God, he picks up the Quran no matter what his background is, he will be guided. So knowing that, we know that the evil forces, Satan and his compatriots, they want for us what? Misguidance. They want us to stray from the path. They don't want us to find guidance. So naturally, when a person goes to get the Quran, to read the Quran, they are going to try their hardest to make sure that the person doesn't benefit from the Quran. And we all know, we are encouraged to read the Quran daily, to read some Quran daily. And as it said, the Quran is the most widely read book in the world. Unfortunately, most Muslims read it in a ritualistic fashion. They don't know Arabic, they learn how to read Arabic and they just repeat the words, but they don't really understand what is being said. But still, those who would go to pick up the Quran to read it, to understand it, Satan or the satanic forces will come and try to discourage the person from reading and benefiting. So what happens? You sit down to read the Quran, you set your time, you decided you're going to read the Quran at this time every day. You open the Quran and you find yourself yawning. Start to yawn, your eyes are starting to get heavy now. But why? Your eyes weren't heavy, you weren't yawning before you picked up the Quran. But all of a sudden you pick up the Quran, you find yourself, and you're telling yourself, then the thought comes to you, I'm kind of tired now, it's after Fajr, in the early morning, maybe I need some more sleep. I'll read it later. So you close the book, and you go to sleep. And of course you get busy the rest of the day, you don't read it that day. And like this. This is how the satanic forces can swerve you from the path, without you realizing it. I'm sure you've all experienced this with the Salah, because Salah is recitation of Quran also, our prayer. You get up to pray, and you were quite fine before. As soon as you get up to pray, you find half the people are praying and they're yawning. Why do you start yawning as soon as you get up to pray? This is a part of that satanic effect of trying to swerve people away from benefiting from the guidance that is there in the reading of the Quran and the remembrance of God. So because of that, we find that Allah has commanded us that whenever we are going to read the Quran, we should seek refuge in Allah from Satan. And this means doing it sincerely. Because if you just go through the ritual, you're going to read A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem and you go ahead. But it's just words you're saying. Then don't be surprised if you find yourself yawning and closing the book. Because seeking refuge in Allah is something which has to come from your heart. When you seek refuge in God to protect you, you have to say it with all your heart. It has to really come from your heart for it to have an effect. After seeking refuge in Allah, we begin the recitation of the Quran by saying Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Most Merciful. This is something that we are encouraged to do generally in our lives. Before doing things, we say Bismillah, to remind ourselves that we're doing it in the name of God, for the pleasure of God. Why also? Because if you are in the habit of saying Bismillah before doing things, then if you are going to do something which isn't good, you're going to feel shy to say Bismillah. And this may catch you to help you to reflect and say, well, no, I shouldn't be doing this. I can't say Bismillah before it. I shouldn't be doing it. We shouldn't do anything in this life that we will feel shamed to say Bismillah before it. In the name of God, I'm doing this. The first verse of this chapter, a very short chapter, revealed in Mecca, comprising of only 4 verses. The first verse, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. قُلْ, say, Huwa, He, Allah, Ahad, is unique. Say, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was commanded to tell the people. When we read the Quran, this is the same thing we should say. This is something that should be a basic, fundamental part of our faith. Allah is unique. And I didn't say Allah is one. You will find this translated as one. Ahad, as one. But actually the word which means one is wahid. This is the word which really means one in Arabic. There's a difference between the word wahid and the word ahad. Allah could have used the word wahid here, but He chose to use ahad. And al-wahid is one of Allah's names also. But Allah uses the name here ahad. What is the difference? The difference is that when you say wahid, one, this doesn't stop there being another one. What do I mean? I mean, if I say there is one bottle of water here, it doesn't mean